Seekers Hub, when it first took shape, this was a natural progression, was to have both of these efforts merged into a space where both of these things can happen together, where we are not just imparting Islamic knowledge, and we're not just learning about the mercy and the concern that the Prophet ﷺ had, our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, had for his fellow creatures, but also creating opportunities for exemplifying this mercy by connecting with local mainstream organizations, people such as the Mississauga Food Bank, people such as Our Place Peel, which is a youth homeless shelter in Mississauga, people such as Interim Place, which is a shelter for abused women, also in Mississauga, and starting today, people such as the Peel Poverty in Action Group, who are dedicated to making a difference on issues of poverty and, from what I understand, specifically homelessness in Mississauga. Now, the reason these issues are important to us was because when we started off Relief Works, we started off as looking at these specific issues of hunger, violence against women and children, and homelessness. We're really grateful for Edna and Emily who have come down and given us of their time to share this movie with us, this short film with us. Now we will be getting a little bit more into what they do as well, and then after that Dr. Umar will be sharing some of his thoughts with us, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. And if you have any questions or comments, please make sure you write them down, because we want this to be a discussion where we can talk about how we can make a difference ourselves as well, how we can be part of the solution.
My name is Edna Toth. I'm the chair of Peel Poverty Action Group, an organization that was set up in 1997 by the Social Planning Council of Peel. Its purpose was to become involved in child welfare, particularly. Since it was founded, many people have become involved in child welfare, and we have moved over to other things where there's less involvement of the public. We are particularly concerned about people who are homeless in the region of Peel. Everyone knows about people who are homeless in Toronto. You see them lying on the streets. In Peel, homelessness is more hidden, but it still very much exists, and there are not the services for it that are in Toronto. We obtained $75,000 from the Ontario Tribune Foundation to make the video that you're about to see. Spaces and Places Uncovering Homelessness in the Region of Peel. It's just 15 minutes long. It's available on YouTube and on other places. And it was made by a group from a videography team from York University, and the research behind it was done by the health nursing section at York. We have taken this video and shown it to groups, mostly faith groups, but also to service clubs and university audiences in Peel region. And we have been, I think, more than satisfied with the results, because people have become aware of the poverty, abject poverty that there is here. I've certainly noticed it is getting worse. Peel Poverty Action Group spends one day a week or a few hours a week at Knight's Table, which is a local soup kitchen in Brampton, and their crowds are getting larger. There are 100 people at a time. The dining room itself is packed, and people are lining up outside. And this has been happening to a greater extent since the summer. There are no indications from the government, which is claiming that the economy is picking up, for no indications that that's really happening. So I'm ready to show the video. What you've just seen is the footage that was made over a period of about 6 months. I think, and the people who appear there, I still see some of them from time to time. They're not in as good shape now as they were then. The gentleman who is blind and legally blind and deaf and so on is much thinner and less looked after, and the guy who was sleeping in the truck has also gone downhill from the way that, in terms that we would look at it. However, the person to talk about homelessness is Emily Fox, who has had some personal experience out of it. So I'll hand the mic over to her.
As Edna said, my name is Emily Fox, and I was homeless here in Peel a number of years ago. I think the experience is probably much worse today. And because I had no idea that we had this kind of poverty here, it came as a shock to me. It was really quite an eye-opener. I went to a shelter and found out that you can only stay at a shelter for 2 weeks. So you have 2 weeks to put your life together, to find a job and to find a landlord that will take you, because you are a risk all of a sudden if you've been in a shelter. I wasn't able to find anything, so they gave me a one-way bus ticket to Toronto. And I arrived there. It was winter and it was dark and I didn't know where to go. I'm not from Toronto, I'm from Mississauga. So I hung around the bus station because that's where they let me out, and met up with other people who were homeless, a lot of them from this region, because we don't like to show our poor people. We like to stick them someplace else. And many of us end up in Toronto. And I spent a winter on the streets, and it changed everything that I had learned. It turned my life upside down completely, because before that I thought it was really important to pay my mortgage, and it was really important to remain at my job, and it was really important to look my best and do my best and all those kinds of things that are good things to do. But on the streets you learn something very, very different. Your priorities become very different. Nothing from the outside of you really matters, because once it's all stripped away and it's gone, you still survive. And I think for those that live long-term on the streets, and for those that survive the streets, they bring so much more than they take. The agencies that are set up to help you can't really grasp what homelessness is. So although they're there and they do try to help, that maybe you'll get a hot meal or a bed to sleep in, they can't address that feeling. People who are homeless can. There were many times when I just hoped that I would freeze to death, because I didn't know how to survive. I didn't know what to do with myself, and I would pray to wake up dead the next morning, because it was that bad. Those other people who were homeless with me were the ones that saved me, because they wouldn't allow that. They wouldn't allow me to freeze to death. They wouldn't allow me to starve to death. There was a real community. So for me, it was harder to come back into our society. I mean, eventually I found work, and then I found an apartment, and then I climbed up that ladder again. It was harder for me to come back into the society that we've created than it was to lose everything in the first place, because I missed that community. I missed people who had their priorities right. It's a lot easier. It's much, much easier without all the trappings, and without having to divide your time and try to make a decision which is more important. Where you were was where you were. The present was important. The people who were around you, they were the ones that mattered. It was so simple. So it changed me forever. I wouldn't recommend it as a spiritual exercise, but I can never forget that part. And I think if there was a way to address the spiritual void that people who are poor have, it affects them in such a way. And we think that if we give them housing, or we give them food, or we give them clothing, they'll be all better. It goes deeper than that. They need to feel that they're worthy. They need to feel that they are a part of this society as much as the most successful person is. And I miss that. I miss being in the company of people who didn't judge me. You know, we were all equal. And if one of us got sick, we'd all get sick because we were all together. If one of us was hungry, we were all hungry. You can't duplicate that in our society. So, if you have any questions, we'll try and answer them.
Yes, Imad.
I have one question. For people that have a house and that have money that they can give to others, what if we see someone on the street, like we're going to work, we see someone on this, lying down. We don't have much time, but we can do something. Because you have experience, what would be that thing that would, something small that could just maybe put a smile on their face? But what could we do to, have a good effect on them? For
look them in the eye. One of the most important things, I was homeless around the Eaton Center, and it was near Christmas, and money was going everywhere for gifts, and people were spending it, and the most important thing to me was when somebody looked me in the eye, as if I was a human being. A good word, good morning, how are you, and mean it, meant far more than anything else.
Thank you. If you want to do something, my views are different to Emily's. We thought that we would maybe put together a comedy team one day. Peel Poverty Action Group does do some political action. We talk to MPs and the MPPs, and more particularly councillors. The region of Peel, you probably know, is responsible for social services in the Mississauga Belt and in the town of Caledon. And the local authorities are less involved. Peel Poverty Action Group at this time has two campaigns on the go. One is to try to get dental care for people who are eating in the soup kitchens simply because we know that they're there. We know that that they really need dental care because we can see it and they can't eat. They do eat. If you don't eat, you die. So that's a huge incentive to eat, whether you have teeth to eat with or not. And the other campaign we have going is to encourage councillors to refuse money that's offered to them by corporations and by trade unions to finance their election campaigns. We think that housing will be dealt with differently if corporations, which includes developers, are not the financial strength behind councillors' elections. There's nothing there against the law. I'm certainly not saying that anyone is bribed, anything like that, but it looks better. At the very least, it looks better if councillors are not reliant on corporations and others for their re-election, usually.
Given the actions that have been taken, where are the gaps that exist to either get people out of homelessness in terms of the services that are being provided, the gaps that exist to help people out of homelessness, or the gaps that exist to help people deal with the difficulties that they face whilst being homeless?
I take the view that you can't address any other problems until people have shelter, but Emily is probably going to disagree.
That's the one point where we agree. The amount of wages that we see, you have so many families that are working poor, and by the time they pay their mortgage or their rent, there's nothing left. So eventually they will end up at risk of being homeless at least. And I think housing is key. If you had rent-to-income units available, you would not see the same kind of poverty. And I think our wait list is what, 21 years?
It can't be that long.
So if you apply for subsidized housing because you're struggling, you can look forward to a wait of about 20 years. And hopefully you won't need it by the time they call you. And I would have to agree with Edna.
So, if Peel Poverty Action Group is doing the political campaign and political lobby, does it also lobby MPs to start providing greater level of sheltered housing or supported housing?
That has been a big issue with us and with other groups as well. Fair Shares Peel has done some research on the amount of money that's made available to Peel region as compared with elsewhere. And in terms of social supports, we receive about 1/3 of the support that's available to other areas of the province. So this happened, as it was explained to me in the long ago. Peel region Peel region didn't exist. But there were very few people living in this area when social service funding was started by the federal government about the 1970s. So if you were an organized city that already existed, you had social service organizations, they applied for grants, they got them, next year they got another 2% over time. And then when organizations started in Peel, they started at the bottom and funding was not per capita. And 2% increase of nothing is still nothing. So the funding has remained low ever since. It would be nice to think that the provincial government, at least, would provide money on a per capita basis, but that has not happened.
I wonder if you could tell us, looking at homeless people in general, I mean, you have like women that are homeless, men that are homeless. You have families that are homeless sometimes. You have young people that are homeless, older people that are homeless. Are there any generalizations that you can make about, what are the kind of things that happen in people's lives, that bring this about? And then also, how many, like on the average, of people that experience homelessness are able to get back into society, as you did, for example? And what are the things that happen that enable them to do that? Like you said that, they need to feel their self-worth, for example.
I don't think there's a particular face of homelessness. I don't think you can define it. And I would disagree with our video. I didn't find a lot of folks addicted to drugs or alcohol. I did not find a lot of mentally ill. I didn't find that brought them to the street. The thing that I found most fascinating was if a person went through some tragedy in their own lives, a divorce, a death, if they lost a child, it didn't matter what supports were in place. I met so many people on the streets that were highly educated, brilliant, had jobs their whole lives, owned companies and owned everything. It seemed that when they fell apart, when something happened in their life that they couldn't make sense of, they lost their will to carry on. And it's like a domino effect. Their life just kind of tumbled down. So that's a little harder to reintegrate somebody unless you look at what happened originally, look at the source of why they gave up. It's very difficult. And in cases of death or divorce or just horrible circumstances that an individual will go through, if they don't have their community or they don't have family, they don't have friends, they just kind of end up poor and never find their way back. I don't think there's a very good rate of bringing people who are homeless back to our society. They come back for a little bit, and it's almost like prison, like you'll see so many folks who are in prison when they're young, and they just keep going back. There's a lack there. There's something that they need that they're not getting from their society. So I don't see a lot of them coming forward. And without housing, they don't. You have to have a fixed address or you don't get any service. If you don't have a fixed address, you have no income. You can't look for work. You can't be social. How do people get in touch with you? You don't have a place where they can find you or a telephone. And in those ways, many of them then turn to drugs or alcohol. And no doubt, we all become a little crazy if we're on the streets because it's such a different lifestyle. So,
is it possible for you to tell your story, or is that too personal?
no, I actually worked for the District Health Council in Peel. One of the projects I did was to interview people about housing in the region. And I always worked contract work. I was a divorced mom, and about 1990, those contracts started to dry up. So I would work a year here, then live off my savings, that kind of thing. I had no benefits at that point. So if my son or I got sick, that was, straight off the top. Didn't think I would ever be homeless. I owned my own home. Didn't enter my mind, and I'd hear these stories from my clients. They would call me from a phone booth or some place, and they would say to me, they've taken my child, foster parents have taken over, and I'm headed for Toronto because there's no place to live. And I'd think, geez, there's something wrong. I'd go to my supervisor, they'd say, no, we've got everything here. We're Peel. And gradually ran out of money. I could not apply for welfare because I had an ex-husband who wasn't paying child support, and the legislation is that as long as you have an ex-husband, you're not eligible for social services, so I couldn't do that. Mortgaged the house, then lost the house, still couldn't find work, and I never believed I would end up on the streets. I thought, I'll go to a shelter, I'll find an apartment and start all over again, right? Just never happened. So,
what happened to your son?
Because my ex was not paying child support, went to live with him, with my ex-husband, who was abusive and a bit of a drinker, and kept him for 4 years while I was trying to reestablish, and then my son came back. But by that time he was a drug addict, and he had been beaten, and he was a mess.
And how did you pick yourself back up?
I had a son who was really messed up. I never gave up hope that he would find me. When you're doing it for someone else, you don't think. And he, as I said, he was so messed up for so many years that there was no thought of giving up. I couldn't.
Thank you.
One of the concerns that I had with the hunger activism that we've been involved with for the past few years is that people who don't have an address are unable to use food banks. Food banks. So when we collect money and donate to food banks, we are helping a certain segment of the population. But we are still unable to make a difference in the lives of people who are homeless. So in terms of helping out with hunger, what's the most efficient way, I guess, is what I'm asking, because we could make food and go out and distribute it, and people do that. But I also understand that when you purchase as a food bank, for example, that you have economies of scale working in your favor. So that $1 as a single person is much more powerful in the hand of a food bank. Can we make what similar better choices can we make in order to support fighting hunger among the homeless?
Some of the food banks require more proof of identity and proof that you're not ripping them off. All the dried out cornflakes, you shouldn't rip them off for that. But people do suspect that this is happening. It's always other people who are cheating, it's never us. I just wonder if we haven't got something better to think of. than trying to check up on people. If they're hungry, they have to eat. As far as homeless people are concerned, they can use the address of the food bank or the place that they're using for food. There are ways around this. John Howard Society, for instance, is quite helpful in providing addresses and phone numbers, that sort of thing. And other places, similarly, it's not an unsolvable problem if you know your way around. How did you find it out?
Toronto's different. The interfaith community in Toronto is really strong. I don't think, we just don't seem to have it here. The Scott Mission, it's a group of people. The food is donated. People come in and make sandwiches. You can either pick those sandwiches up, or I think they've got access to a van now that they just go out and, deliver sandwiches. There was a Jewish group of ladies who used to, in the wintertime, go to the dollar store and buy socks, for your feet, bake up baked potatoes, put butter and salt and pepper in them, and put them in socks, and then hand out a pair of socks with a baked potato. Everybody loved that. They loved those ladies. They just did it on their own. They didn't care about all of the legislation and policy and that. They just got in their van and cook up 10 pounds of potatoes, and whoever needed them got them. There is a faith group that we spoke at that goes out every Sunday morning or once a month or something. Yes, and they just collect up food, make sandwiches or whatever, and I think their parishioners actually do the transportation. They just go and hand out food. The food banks are, it's good if you have a fixed address. If you have a card to go and get your food, because it's very heavy, fruits and vegetables and 10 pounds of potatoes, you're not going to carry that on the bus. A lot of people don't have bus fare to get to food banks. They're not in locations that they're on a bus line, but if you don't have $3, you can't make use of it. So some of the churches that are smaller and more local, people can walk and get what they need, right? I think that would be good. The Compass is a good place. I don't know if you know of it. The Compass. The Compass is a little storefront on Lakeshore. It's a group of churches that get together, and people can come and they shop there. They're given a budget which is not real money, it's kind of like monopoly money. And you have your credit, and you're allotted so much depending on the size of your family. And then you select things from their shelves that you would like. Everything's free, but your dignity is intact because you have a balance, and you go to the checkout, and she checks you out, and next week, it serves a lot of people. And I don't know if you need an address to get in there or not. I have no idea.
We have 2 or 3 questions from online, from the students online. So one of the sisters is asking, for people that have a house and have money and they can give to others, from your experience, what do you think are the steps that activists need to take to reduce the rate of homelessness in Peel? So I think this is specifically about activists and what activists can do to reduce the rate of homelessness in Peel. Is it about fundraising projects? And once we have the money raised, where should those funds be directed very specifically?
So this is more about preventative. Okay.
The region of Peel has a system, I'm not sure that isn't too polite a word for it, where people who are in danger of losing their shelter can have rent paid on their behalf. I think that's a once in a lifetime. Yes. It doesn't happen all the time. They are hoping, I talked with some of the councils, and the hope is that they will get more money and they will be able to subsidize people in the places where they are. There is also the provincial government recently changed the laws in regard to zoning, and all municipalities are now required, all municipalities in Ontario are now required to examine their zoning requirements to see if they can ease up on them so that more secondary units, that's basement apartments, that sort of thing, can be established in places which are currently zoned for single families. The feeling behind that is that people who are getting older will be able to stay in their own homes and rent out part of it. They no longer need it for their own teenagers, so someone else can come in. And there's also when people fall on hard times, lose jobs, whatever, if they can rent out part of the house legally, then it may tide them over. And this would create a certain amount of housing which would be available for people who are homeless or are in danger of becoming homeless. It would quite rapidly increase the number of apartments available. Peel Poverty Action Group made a presentation of that, I think, in 2009, and by 2011, the provincial government had brought in the legislation. It was up to us, or maybe not. Mississauga has moved very quickly on this, and they have already held one meeting and plan to hold 4 or 5 around the city to bring people on side and get some idea of what the public reaction is to having secondary apartments. With the rapidly aging population, I would think that there will be some considerable acceptance of this, but there are still people who don't want visitors on their street. There might be parking problems, there might be schools. The city of Mississauga thinks it might get more tax money because if there were 2 families living, they're using twice as much in the way of services. However, they were using twice as much in the way of services when their kids were at home. So that's something you could argue about. Does that add something? Maybe it does. Anyway, I'll hand over to Emily.
I would only say, like, for activists, the key thing is housing. You can lobby, and when they downloaded the housing from the province, we were just not equipped. The Region of Peel was not ready. They didn't know what they were doing. Their subsidy buildings were so small, and they're not in the business of housing. So anybody that wants to take on a challenge, I mean, we need rent, geared to income accommodation for people that's safe and reliable.
There is one more thing I'll say about that, and that is most of the available land that's waiting to be built on in Mississauga, certainly, and mostly in Brampton, is already owned by developers. So it's land that nobody wants or nobody has spoken for that is available for building social housing. However, the churches have been very generous in this. The faith groups have come through. Many of them do have land, and they have made it available. And that's, I think, is where most of the land has come from. That's available for social housing.
Habitat for Humanity, how effective is involvement with them?
Oh, I don't know a great deal about Habitat for Humanity. I know in the first year, I think they built 1 house. In the second year, they built 3, and I think they're up to 30 a year now. But we have 15,000 people 15,000 families on the waiting list for housing. Habitat for Humanity is very nice, but it needs real money.
Questions from online?
Just one more question and a comment. I'm wondering how we can empower those on the street to get back into society instead of just donating money.
I think shelter is still key. I was talking with some people today to see what can be done. A lot of people in the faith groups, especially, who are sort of hot to trot and want to do something. And one suggestion that we had was that people could adopt a family for Christmas. That's very nice. I'm not in favor of it because you're imposing upon people, I think, at Christmas time. And also a warning, if you are going to do that, make sure that whatever is you're donating doesn't need batteries. because it's no longer a gift if it needs batteries. And the other possibility was just buy bus tickets and give them to people, or give them to an agency which will give bus tickets to people who need them to get to the agency or to get wherever they need to go. I'll hand over to Emma.
As far as empowering people, you end up with a huge set of transferable skills if you've ever lived on the streets, and particularly good skills with helping other people on the streets. And I'm amazed at the amount of money that's given to, for example, a social worker who's put in charge of reducing homelessness. Certainly if agencies employed, a homeless person or two, they would have a different way of looking at it. Perhaps a partnership would be good because you would have the connections and the education. But you'd also have the very practical parts. And there's a different language on the street. They would be able to connect with others and maybe encourage them. Everybody on the street has talent. I mean, it's there. It's just not, it's like mining it and coming up with it, because a lot of the skills that you do learn are completely transferable.
I guess younger folk who are perhaps in the 25 to 35 age range, or 50 to, like either high school or university, or people who have just graduated and have just entered the workforce, what 3 points can we have from you to walk away from here that we can implement in the way we see and do things and the way we interact with people who are homeless? What are the three key steps that we need to take to make a difference and to be a part of the solution for homelessness, not just in Peel, but also in the Greater Toronto area? From both of you, please.
Okay, I'll hand it over to you.
I would say knowing, the knowledge that we do have poverty. We don't see it every day, but remember it. Remember that there are people who aren't eating today or don't have anywhere to sleep. That would be number one. I'm a great believer in a power greater than myself. So if you have connections and other people that you can discuss and pray with or think with or talk to, things often come to your mind that could develop into something helpful. And I would think the third part is, now that you're aware of it and you've prayed about it and you know that it's there, when you see it, acknowledge it. If you see someone who is struggling, don't be afraid to offer compassion or to, kind of include them.
We have done 3. How many have we done?
We do have 3 after all.
The practical things, I think, are those that Emily has detailed. I've taken interest in people who are having a hard time because your turn may come. And if things can be arranged so that people are not homeless, and they can be, then there will be one less thing to worry about. And if you do fall on hard times, it's not going to be so urgent. With people, certainly, there are people who go to Knight's Table, for instance, and they admit they're not there just for the food, they're also there for the company. This is another huge lack, I think, in that when you are homeless, you have nowhere to go. You can go and eat your meal, and then you leave, and you wander around with your mates, I guess. And this is Peel, it's not Toronto. There are not a lot of things to see. There's not a lot of action on the street. In any case, business people certainly don't want you hanging around if you haven't got a place and you look kind of scruffy. Those are things to make people feel welcome, and we do need to provide something for them, something for them to do, something that we would all enjoy doing. And that Knight's Table wants to get a building where they can provide other classes or just a room to hang out. and where people can learn stuff if they want to, or where they can just be and not have someone chasing them around. That's it.
I think Edna just went some way towards answering my question before I asked it. Because my final question was, and this comes as the person who runs the Seekers Hub, was we have this space, and we have a space that we like to call a hub. The reality is that there is only a certain section of the population that utilises it, and utilises it at certain times. And I would like to open the doors and make it much more accessible and much more available to people who don't have a place to go. And it's not something we can't offer shelter at night because we can't just legally in all of those, but we certainly can during the day offer a place that's warm and safe. But you kind of went some way towards answering it, because if organisations like Knight's Table are looking for space that they can offer things in, then perhaps ours is our action, or is something that we should be doing, contacting those sorts of organisations and saying, here you go, here's a space.
We would, or we're planning to, or we will, or we have, talk to people who operate franchises. So most of the franchises, like Swiss Chalet or Pizza Hut or whatever, they know exactly where to put the next Pizza Hut because they have done the studies of the population. So one almost needs to be able to operate a franchise for homeless people, people who are experiencing homelessness, and open a place for them with all the bits that go with it. And Knight's Table's idea is that they should be able to have soup kitchens in various different spots, not all concentrated in one area. That would be less upsetting for business people, and it would also provide better service for people who use it. The thing is, of course, there is not money to be made out of people who have no homes.
Every single service we offer is for free. We don't charge people to use our premises, and we don't charge people to come in and learn. So. Yeah,
well, I think many of the mosques offer services, and so do the gurdwaras. And many of the churches do as well in the Port Credit area, and of course in Brampton, where there is a better organisation.
Just our online students just wanted to say thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us with such strength and confidence. Thank you.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Begin in the name of God, the most gracious and most merciful. Allahumma ftah alayna bi hikmatika wa anshur alayna bi rahmatika ya dhal jalali wal ikram. We ask God to give us an opening of wisdom and understanding. And I'm, very happy that Edna and that Emily came here, and I myself am a visitor here. I admire the people who are behind the hub very much, and I want to come here and be with them and see what they do and learn from them, and also take part in teaching. And although I've just been here for a few days now, and I've been very impressed with everything that I've seen, this program tonight was an extremely educational one. And I hope that we benefit from it, and I hope that all the people here and the people online understand the value of it. And we ask God to give us compassion. It's interesting that we believe in Jesus Christ, we believe in the Messiah, Jesus, peace be upon him. We live in a society which is overwhelmingly Christian, it claims to be so. Jesus was a homeless person, and it's astounding really when we have a society in which our cultural norms are ones in which you have throwaway people, and when the people are thrown away, we want them out of sight, and we want them away from us, just as Emily was saying and Edna was saying repeatedly, that homeless people are not welcomed, around businesses, around franchises. Where do they go? What do they have to do? And we should also remind ourselves that, generosity never depletes. This is what we're taught. This is what biblical religion teaches. This is also what our religion teaches. So helping people, even though those people themselves may be helpless, even though they may be blind or legally blind or deaf or unable to function, that's never a waste. When we begin to be generous and to help others, then we are the ones who also are the beneficiaries, because our hearts are opened and we get better understanding. So I hope that we can ultimately do something that is meaningful in this regard, so that all people are welcomed, whoever they are, and so that we can be interested in everybody and not have a particular class of people that we like because they dress well and they're employed and they have degrees, and as for other people who have been faced with hardship, that we don't want to see them, we don't want them to be around us, we want to live as if they did not exist. So, may we understand those things. The Prophet ﷺ, he taught us that every human being has a right to shelter, to water, to heat, to food, and to clothing. This is a human right. Every being that God has created, whether a human being or an animal, they have a right to live, and they have a right to live well. We are not free to discard anyone. And as Muslims, we have two types of moral obligations. We have, first of all, individual obligations. And among those that immediately come to mind are acts of worship that we have to do individually. A lot of Muslims, they just focus on this, and they're just told about this, and then they forget everything else. The other type of obligations are societal obligations. And these are duties that we have as a community, to help and to build and to do different things. And taking care of the homeless is one of those societal obligations. The Prophet said, peace be upon him, none of you believes until he loves for his brother, and the word here, brother here means also sister, until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. And the brother here, as Imam al-Nawawi and other great scholars have shown, is your brother in humanity. It's not just your brother in faith or your sister in faith. So you do not believe if you do not desire, for other people what you desire for yourself. You want to dress well, you want to be clean, you want to have people care for you, you want people to look up to you and to think that you're worthy. If you have trouble, you want someone to help you. You have to want that for everyone else, not just for your own faith community. And the Prophet made this very clear, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because in another hadith, he said that none of you believes until he loves for his neighbor what he loves for himself. Again, the neighbor is your brother in humanity. And the neighbors of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam were mostly Jews. And he visited them, he gave them gifts, he talked to them. If they were sick, he wanted to see about them. And also in our definition of neighbor, that the neighbor is, 40 houses around you. And when we are as many as we are in Mississauga, or Peel or in Toronto, then everybody here is our neighbor. There's no one who's not. And the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that you do not, none of you believes. You do not believe in God, truly. If you go to bed satiated, and your neighbor is hungry. So that's, again, not just your Muslim neighbor, not just your neighbor in faith. It is everyone. And the Prophet said, peace be upon him, that in doing good to anything that has a moist liver, which is an Arab expression for any living thing. For any living thing, a cat, a dog, a horse, an old horse. We're not allowed to take old horses and kill them, for example. And we had in the past pious endowments for people like the homeless. That's also something we should think of, because in our tradition we believe in endowments. So we had endowments for the homeless. We had endowments for people, for prisoners. We had endowments for old cats and dogs and horses, donkeys, mules, that had reached the end of their lives. They couldn't do anything beneficial anymore. And animals have a right to live. In Islam you have divine rights, which are God's rights over us, and you have human rights, and you have the rights of animals. So it's very important for us, and this is one of the themes of the Hub, to renew our understanding and to help others to understand. And since we are the brothers of the people in this society and the sisters, and since this is overwhelmingly a Christian society, we should also make it very clear, as we said before, that Jesus Christ was a homeless person. He had no home, he paid no mortgage, he owned only what he carried with him and wore, and he slept at the end of the day wherever he found himself. And many of the great saints, in biblical history and in Islamic history were this way. Uwais al-Qarni, may Allah be pleased with him, whom the Prophet said was the greatest of all of the successors of the generation after his companions. He was a homeless person. Abu Hurairah and the people of Suffah, of the bench in the Prophet's mosque, those were also people, all people who were very poor. They were homeless people. And they were people devoted to worship, no doubt, and to study and so forth, but they were homeless people. They had no means whatsoever. So it's very important for us to understand that, what we talked about tonight, which was extremely educational and extremely beneficial, this was a great gift. And although, unfortunately, we just have the best of the best who came, inshallah, I wish that we had, and of course many of the best would have been here, but they couldn't for some reason. But, the Arabs say, awwalul khayri qutwa. The first, the good rain, the beneficial rain, because there's some rains that are not beneficial. They cause floods and destruction. But the beneficial rain begins with a single drop. So may this be a single drop. And may we, as our community, understand that this is not for us a voluntary option. This is a religious duty. It is a societal religious duty. That we have to take care of the homeless. We have to be concerned about them. It's not like what a good person you would be if you did that. And when we do that, then we are the beneficiaries, and they are also hopefully as well. And hopefully we learn ways by direct experience that enables them to put their lives back together. And in the case of societal obligations, in individual obligations, particularly when they're acts of worship like prayer or fasting, they can always be made up. But in societal obligations, when they are not met, then the whole community is guilty, even the best. So societal obligations are a huge burden. They're a huge moral burden that we have to bear. And we cannot neglect them. We cannot live as if these things don't happen because we didn't see them. We have to find out, as we found out tonight. And of course we knew this before, but we learned a lot tonight. This is a very good video, and very good to have Emily here, our sister Emily. And, you know, inshallah, also, you know, God is the one who tests human beings. This is our belief. And He tests us with different kinds of tests to see how we respond individually and how we respond, you know, as brothers and sisters and families and communities. You know, so when we are well-to-do, as so many people are in this society or in the United States. What's the problem? Okay, is it a problem? So, you know, when, you know, it's very important for us, you know, not to, you know, to forget the people who live outside the parameters of that life that we live in. We have to be concerned with them. And if we're not, then we bear a great moral responsibility. One of the aspects of dysfunction in Muslim communities around the world is that we have forgotten societal obligations. Our duty towards animals. Animals cannot be mistreated. You know, they have to be fed properly. They have to be treated properly. You know, our water has rights. Water has to be taken care of. It can't be polluted. So these are things that we should be engaged in. And again, when we do it, since all of us are responsible, if we don't do it at all, then the people who do it, they get an immense reward. And one of the greatest aspects of that reward is that their hearts begin to come to life. You know, the Prophet ﷺ used to tell us, you know, to pat the orphan on his head mercifully, because your heart becomes soft. You know, and the Qur'an tells us, you know, not to repel the orphan, and not to be harsh with the one who asks you for something. So all of these things are things that, you know, if we fail to do them, we harm ourselves. We impoverish ourselves. Our hearts become hard. And if we do them, then one of the greatest rewards of all is that we become human. And I like very much what Emily said, that, you know, living with nothing, you know, when all of a sudden all of the trappings of the world around you, they're nothing anymore. You're just living, you know, and, you know, that there is an honesty that comes with that. There is an awareness of truth and of ultimate reality that comes with that. So, you know, we need to also learn about that world, and we need to help, and we need to find intelligent ways to do that. You know, that we can sustain, and that can also sustain us. We ask God to make us people who have empathy and sympathy, and, you know, who never look down on others, because again, God is the one who tests, and He tests for great wisdom. And, you know, when I asked Emily the question about the background of the people who are homeless, and I actually wanted to hear what she said. And that is that, you know, because usually we think that, well, these are immoral people, you know, and usually immoral people are abused people. But, you know, as she pointed out, that most of them are just ordinary human beings, you know, who are educated, who were CEOs. She herself was employed, you know, at a very good job, paying her mortgage, and so forth. And again, what we know is that, you know, as we say in the proverb, you know, that there but for the grace of God go I. We should never forget that, because you are as wholesome as you are, and you live in the wonderful castle that you live in, protected from all the arrows and slings of fortune, you know, because God has protected you from certain things. God has not exposed you to certain things. He has not tempted you with certain things. He has not shown you certain things. We call that being covered. You know, being, you know, having being protected. So, and if that protection were removed, and if that same experience came to us, we would be no different. So this is why it's so important never to look down upon your brother or sister who has been tried by these things. And in any case, I enjoyed this very much, and I hope that our words are not a proof against us. And I hope that we will be able, to apply what we know. There is no practice without knowledge. That you can't do something if you don't know how to do it. So if we want to help the homeless, we have to know how to do that. As Emily said, sometimes just giving money or food it's not enough. There are other things that have to be done. But, so there is no practice without knowledge. We have to know how to do it right, how to do it best. But there's no knowledge without practice. That, if we learn this, if we hear about it, if we know that this is a moral obligation, then that knowledge becomes a proof against us, unless we put it into practice. So we ask God to enable us to act on this. And alhamdulillah, we've collected blankets. That's from the goodness of our brothers and sisters and the listeners, the people online. And we have quite a few blankets, right? That's good. It's cold here in the winter. But, we should really do more about this. And it should be just the first of other projects, to be contributors to this society. And people who help others to the best of our ability. اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضاه وجعلنا من عبيدك السعداء وأمتنا على كلمة الهدى علمنا ما ينفعنا ووفقنا للعمل بما علمتنا به واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم يا رب العالمين. الفاتحة. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming.
Just to a couple of closing comments. This session was our first contact, so to speak, with issues of addressing homelessness. Seekers Works, as you all know, we've been working not just on local hunger issues in Toronto, but also on local hunger issues in Australia as well, in Sydney, Australia, and in Melbourne. And we are now involved in various projects, various Ansar projects that are running in New Zealand and Fiji as well. And we have now just, specifically in Toronto, we had not just raised money for overseas calamities like the flooding in Pakistan, for Gaza, and for the hunger situation in East Africa, but also for Canadian for causes related to people in Canada as well. And first we were addressing hunger, and then we had reached out to abused women and children over here in Mississauga by collecting these blankets that you see. The campaign, by the way, is still running. We are at 80% of our target. We still need to collect 20 blankets more. Please keep them coming. And so one of the things that was on our radar was homelessness and what can we do about it, how can we make a difference. So this was the first meeting of sorts with the Peel Poverty in Action Group, and what we are looking to do is putting together a volunteer team for the next campaign, because as this campaign wraps up, we're already thinking about the next one we will be launching, and we would like it to be to make some difference of some sort on the homelessness scene, for which we will, God willing, be in further communication with yourselves and with other organizations to see how can, where can we come in, what can we do. But I'd like to thank both of you, Edna and Emily, for coming in and sharing your time with us and sharing your thoughts with us and teaching us. So we will need to sit quite a bit with you and learn a lot more and get more again before and see what little we can do to make a difference locally. But thank you very much for coming and sharing your time with us. And thank all of you for coming here for this session and everybody who's logged in online. And I'm looking forward to having further discussions with all of you about making a difference, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.